Here, the Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Brook has been further attacked by Conservative MPs for suggesting the IRA cannot be defeated and for hinting at possible talks with Sinn Féin. Ian Gow, a former junior minister, said a general shouldn't tell his soldiers they cannot win. But Mr Brook has been supported by a leading Northern Ireland politician, the SDLP leader John Hume, at his party conference at Newcastle in County Down.
John Hume leads the biggest party representing Catholics in Northern Ireland, the SDLP. In recent years, it's eaten into the Sinn Féin vote. Mr Hume didn't today directly refer to Peter Brook's hint at talks with Sinn Féin if they stopped supporting violence. But he took the idea a step further. He once again called on militant Republicans to stop, so a political solution could be found.
Have those who are engaged in what they call an armed struggle the self-confidence to lay down their arms and join the rest of us in that search? Can they sit round a table relying, like the rest of us, only on our convictions and our abilities?
Much of the row's been over Mr Brook's comment that the IRA is unlikely to be defeated militarily. That, say the critics, undermines the police and the army. It's understood Mr Brook hasn't yet discussed his remarks with the Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher, but he was at his office in London today discussing the furore with his advisers. But in West Belfast, the terrorist campaign goes on. A rocket which hit a Land Rover injured 4 policemen. A house was taken over by gunmen and the rocket launched from the roof of an outhouse. Part of the device was left lying on the ground afterwards.
Troops could be running Britain's ambulance service by the middle of next week, according to the health union NUPE. The claim came as ambulance staff agreed to step up their work to rule, despite threats of suspension.
Ambulance staff in Surrey met late last night considering this letter warning of suspension if they don't work normally. Almost unanimously, they voted to continue their action.
Nobody's happy about the way this has gone. Nobody wants to have to take action, but we've just been put in a position where there's nothing else we can do.
A short meeting today only restated positions. Crews say they'll stay at their posts even if management refuse to put through emergency calls. Managers warn of contingency plans to sustain services.
My primary responsibility is to provide a service to patients, and irrespective of what happens during this dispute, that is uppermost in my mind.
With the Surrey ambulance crews deciding to continue with their action and with the ultimatum from management, positions have become more entrenched. There will now be something of a phony war period, perhaps through to the middle of next week. But from then on, suspensions of crews and possibly the use of troops becomes a distinct likelihood.
Lebanese Christians have been marching through their area of Beirut in support of their leader, General Aoun. He's rejected the Arab League's peace plan and called new elections for next January.
General Aoun is in an aggressive mood. He's dissolved parliament to try to make the presidential election illegal and plans to call a vote of his own in 2 months' time. The deputies gathered in northern Syrian-controlled Lebanon cannot elect their candidate until other MPs, now trying to make their minds up in Paris, come back to make up the numbers. The Christian masses on the street went wild today in support of General Aoun's fight against what he sees as Syrian occupation of his country and an election result imposed by outsiders. But the Arab and the international world, this struggle is in vain, and that ultimately these people will find no solution through the General's campaign. Tim Llewellyn, BBC, Beirut.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians chanting "Death to America" have been demonstrating in Tehran. It's 10 years since students there occupied the US embassy and took its diplomats hostage.
It was almost a carbon copy of 10 years ago, chanting crowds demanding death to America, proclaiming their willingness to fight to the last drop of their blood against the United States. A decade on, there's no doubt that in the eyes of many Iranians, the United States is still the great Satan. And today's anniversary was an opportunity for the radicals in the Iranian leadership to stir up anti-American feeling and remind the world that post-Khomeini, the Islamic Revolution still lives. 7 Iranian military officers were produced on television to confess to being spies for the CIA. And Ali Akbar Mohtashemi, the leading radical recently sacked as Home Affairs Minister, was the center of attention. A sharp reminder for the more pragmatic leaders that they must tread carefully. They need to normalize relations with the West and particularly the United States if the country's devastated industry is to be rebuilt. but the radicals are still a force to be reckoned with. Keith Graves, BBC News in the Middle East.
Here, homeless young people have begun a vigil outside Downing Street. They're calling for a change in the social security regulations, which they say have forced many out onto the streets. The housing charity Shelter says there are 150,000 homeless youngsters, many sleeping rough.
There have been young people sleeping on the streets of London for years, but Shelter says the problem is nationwide and has been getting worse because of changes in social security regulations. David came to London looking for work, but says the complex rules have kept him homeless and jobless.